there's a whole other level of opportunity of education, not just to the person doing inventory optimization, but to the entire supply chain team, as well as the clinicians, to set expectations and really do a little bit of a readjustment on our mindset and philosophy that just because there's an empty space doesn't mean panic.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
This week on Power Supply, we speak with Angie Haggard, CEO at Ron Denton & Associates, LLC. We're going to be talking about inventory optimization. And boy, has inventory and inventory management been a struggle as of late for so many of those of you out there in supply chain. And Hayes, I'm looking forward to getting some best practices from Angie to say, let's set a baseline, and everybody's got a very different one. And then let's start taking this to the future, because in a lot of cases, it's just throw more bodies at it. And we just don't have the bodies to do that anymore.
No bodies to throw anywhere, anymore. But Angie, absolutely, 20 plus years in this business. She knows everybody. She's been in hundreds of hospitals. She has a great, great understanding of what's going on out there. So yeah, come on and listen to her.
We'll be right back with Angie Haggard, CEO at Ron Denton & Associates, LLC, after a short break.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Angie Haggard, CEO at Ron Denton & Associates, LLC. And Angie, you and I have run or crossed paths recently in person because we're back to some of these live events. And so I'm happy to say that I had an opportunity to meet you live and in person, even if it was only for a quick 20 minutes in the middle of an expo. But I'm also happy to welcome you to the show. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we talk a little bit about your background and how you find yourself doing what you do today?
Awesome. So my background is 25 years in supply chain. We'll just leave it at 25 plus, with a portion of that being outside healthcare industry and the past 20 being inside healthcare. And after having a family member who went through some challenging times and my passion for supply chain and seeing a family member not have the right supplies at the right time, I thought, oh, I can make a difference. And everyone says every industry is different, but I'm sure healthcare is pretty close to all the other industries. And so needless to say, after joining in healthcare in the first day, I realized very quickly that saying was very accurate, that all industries are very different. So I've been very fortunate to stay in supply chain and really utilize the background and experience I had outside healthcare, inside healthcare, to help hospitals and healthcare organizations optimize their supply chain and inventories.
Well, boy, is that the elusive challenge right there, is trying to optimize inventory, because in so many ways, we don't always have a really good idea of what the inventory is that we have. Just, having the right data. And we've had lots of conversations about data. We've had a few conversations around inventory and gathering inventory, but we haven't really talked about how to optimize inventory. And so before we even get into the optimization and some best practices and how people are doing it today and where they can improve, why don't we talk about what it really is? What does it mean? I mean, I think a lot of times we hear these words, inventory, we hear optimization, we hear them combined, but I want to make sure we're all really grasping the full scope of what inventory optimization really would encompass.
A great question, and one that I'm often asked by my friends and family who are not in healthcare supply chain. What exactly does optimization mean? So in my words, optimization is truly having the right product at the right place at the right time at the right quantity. I know we've all heard about those R's in our education and background, but that doesn't always mean having just enough. It may mean you have more of one item and less of another item, but using information to figure out and determine what is that exact right amount.
Angie, can I jump in here right fast? Could you say that you and I share a common bond with the Tennessee Volunteers? Would you say like opening up that stadium on game day, would that be optimized like absolute perfection? Is that how you would kind of say that?
100%, especially with a roaring crowd in the background that's so loud you cannot even hear yourself scream. That is optimization.
All right, when that right. So okay, that's just making sure we understand what true perfection and optimization is, and we can carry on there now. Just making sure.
That brought back good memories, Hayes, of the T opening up when the band was there on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Chills.
So Angie, I'll jump in here after that volunteer direction, which was, I don't even know who the volunteers are. I'm from the Northwest. I think it's Tennessee. Is that right? Is that Tennessee?
Tennessee is one of the top supply chain management schools in the country.
Oh, I did not know that. That is great. That is awesome. Thank you for sharing. You know, I'm gonna just go back a little bit. You talked about optimization, but you also talked about your previous experience with a family member and you could make a difference. I always get all hung up on mission driven for the patient. So when we talk about that optimization from a mission centric, patient focused mentality, what are your thoughts that go into that when you're thinking about someone that's on the table in the OR or someone that's in the cath lab getting a procedure? How do you really go with your scope and your direction on making sure you have the right product? Just add some flavor to that, please, Angie.
Yeah, great question. It is a combination of science, data, and art. And so many times individuals, including myself, when starting out, was thinking, okay, this is what the spreadsheet says, this is what the numbers say, this is what the analytics say, go with this. But incorporating that one item that may only be used once a year or maybe 0 times a year, that is clinically critical. If you're the patient on the table needing that heart transplant, and we haven't done any heart transplants in the past year, but having that valve on the shelf when it's needed is critically important. So it's really combining the analytics and the art together is really critical.
Great answer. Thank you.
So how do you train for that? I mean, that's something that there's a lot of art form in various areas of the medical industry. I mean, it's not just this area, but how do you train for the art? Is it simply an experiential skill that it's acquired over time? How do you do that? How do you tackle that?
That's a tough question. I would say that experience is definitely the key. And that's part of what makes it so challenging, is because there isn't a specific formula that you can apply the math to say, okay, for these X number of items, yes, these are critical, but what's critical in hospital A may not be critical in hospital B. So it's the experience and understanding what elements need to be incorporated into the art portion of that formula.
So do you think that there's a need for specialization in supply chain to help with that? I mean, especially as we look at workforce shortages and everything else. I mean, I just want to highlight how important the people are and retention. And I mean, this is a big theme. I just came back from a large conference in Minnesota, and it was a huge part of the agenda. And the topic was about the workforce shortages and impact. And yes, a lot of that was on the clinical side and sourcing, when you're paying nurses, a lot of money for travelers because you just don't have the staff to do the procedures. But a lot of it's in supply chain too. And just look at the strain everybody's been under the last 2 years. Is there an opportunity for specialization here to address that to some extent?
100% yes. Definitely there is, because we think about all the different roles and responsibility inside of a hospital, and they're all critical in some shape, form, or fashion. And I'm a huge fan and believer in training and education. So the more we can train the next generation and the next wave of individuals coming into supply chain, and specifically healthcare supply chain, because I can honestly say from experience, it truly is different, that specialized training and education is needed and necessary.
Angie, you bring up a really good point, and leading off of what Justin just said from his conference he came back on specialization. I think about the outside people supporting supply chain too, and the vendors. Burning and turning back and through sales and account reps and those individuals. There is some strong device reps, per se, if I could use them as an example, that are specialized. I think about them as a key role as well, not losing, a surgeon has a device rep they've had for 12 years that knows the ins and outs and knows what they need. I mean, that's a key player as well. Do you agree, Angie?
That was one of my first, are you kidding me moments when I got into healthcare, was working inside the OR from a supply chain perspective and observing the vendor doing the majority of the procedure and the doctor standing beside observing versus doing. And so that was a definite aha moment of make sure you have a vendor in your area that is recently trained before you go in for a procedure.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was that guy, many years ago. I was a device rep. And to your point, there were a few clients of mine, customers that they couldn't have done the surgery without me in the room. Others was, it was not an issue because they did enough and they understood it. But yes, absolutely. I think, a lot of times they kind of get, people say negative things about reps in the rooms occasionally, but I'll tell you what, I've been there when we've saved a doctor or two and or a patient, from having a bad, outcome potentially. So anyway, but yeah, absolutely. I think it plays a vital role.
All right. So let's bring it back to inventory optimization and set the current state. I think everything we just talked about is really critical because even that vendor managed inventory is sometimes one of those blind spots. So it very much plays into this conversation, but let's just set the current state. How are most hospitals and health systems doing inventory optimization today? And, are they even doing it? And if they are, how is it commonly done?
Right. It is, Justin, is all over the board. We see organizations that some don't have the resources to do inventory optimizations. Others are doing it manually via Excel and the old methods of optimizing inventory. And others may have systems, point of use systems or ERPs that have a portion of inventory optimization that's included in the technology. But unless an organization has someone who wakes up every morning and that is their job, their focus, just like Hayes was saying about the device reps, why are they so good? Why do they save lives? How can they save lives? Is because they're trained. That's what they're focused on, and that's their mission. That's their purpose, and that's their cause. So very rarely do we see health systems that have a person or persons dedicated to inventory optimization. They'll have individuals that pick, receive, put away, but not someone who's getting up every morning saying, how can we make sure we have the right product at the right time, and doing the analytics and that art. So that is very rare that we see that in place.
So that would be an area of specialization then, potentially.
Yes, for certain.
And that's not something you see very often today.
No, not at all. It gives us, in our time and place, post-COVID of labor becoming less and less prevalent, plus the exodus of seasoned individuals who have been in healthcare supply chain, it is the truly the perfect storm when it comes to that. So it's very critical for us in the industry, not only to focus on the training, but also organizations to recognize the importance of having that individual or individuals in those roles so they can start to get the benefits of, yes, that's maybe an additional cost. It may be additional effort to create that separate position on the org chart, but the value and the gains are multifold.
You know, and Angie, you bring up a point that I think about this, and you think about supply chain, old school materials management with an E, and it was grabbing a box, uncrating it, taking it where he needed to, and being done. I think that, in my opinion, and I believe, and I want your opinion on this too, it's changed, it's evolved. It's no longer just that person doing that. I don't want to say it's suit and tie, but it's a different thought process. We go back to your science, data, and art. And I really, really struggle. I see a lot of nurses that do inventory, and I know that's important, but I think about nurses should be patient care. I really struggle with that, and I come back to that. I want that org chart. I think it's important to have that person who is specialized in that area. Do you agree? Your thoughts? What do you think?
100% agree. You know, I'm confident a nurse or a patient would not want me as a supply chain SME going in to sew on an arm. It's not my forte and not my area of expertise. So having someone who is focused on supply chain and focused on inventory is definitely critical. And that's even additional benefits that the hospital can gain, because the more time, as we all know, that the clinicians spend with the patient, the better the patient outcomes. So if there is even 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes that can be saved from a clinician or a physician for that matter, thinking about supply chain or inventory, and that can be dedicated to someone else who's getting up every day thinking about that, all the better.
Well, Angie, one thing that, obviously we've talked about optimization and all these different things, but one thing that I know RDA is doing and is seeing, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, is on people. I mean, we're all talking about having a specialized person there, but in so many cases, these systems are struggling with people, right? With workforce management, getting the right people there. Are you seeing that in all your accounts and where you're talking and who you're talking to?
Yes, and at all levels in supply chain, leadership level, mid-management level, down to the hourly teammates inside the health systems. That is definitely a gap right now. So organizations are really just trying to do their best to find ways, and we help out in various areas with that also, but it's really a critical time.
Mm-hmm. So I think when we talk about the specialization aspect of everything and the opportunities for improvement, obviously we're going to be talking about technology, because we know there's not enough bodies. But I wanted to kind of take this soft skill approach just one step further before we go into some of those opportunities. And I'm wondering, not everybody has the inclination to do this optimization role. Like if they were assigned to it, how hard is it to find somebody in the organization that really has the soft skill set to be successful? And do you think that's part of the reason, like maybe some facilities have that role because they have the person that matches it? They have just this natural inclination. They almost say, this is what I want to do here because it's needed. And so somebody lets them do it. But when that person leaves, they really don't have anybody who has that same inclination and aptitude. And so the position kind of falls off. And I don't know if that's what happens, but I wanted to talk to you about, is that something you really could just give somebody the skill set, or is that just kind of one of those soft skills that people fall into really naturally?
Good question. It's from what we have seen and have worked with organizations to train and mentor, it's not a natural skill. Analytics is a natural skill. Understanding data is a natural skill. But combining the two with the data, the science, and the art is not a natural skill. So that's where the training comes into play and the focus on that training. So what organizations can do is utilize the technology that they have. There are other technology and solutions out there that can help minimize the manual labor. And even if there's opportunity for some outside assistance one time to help get them off get the benefits sooner than later. And while they're training the new person or looking for the new person, it can help them out with that challenge that they're facing today.
That's great. That whole soft skill piece and everything, I just think it's something that leaders now, especially, and if you do start looking at specialization, you got to be really aware of that, because you're putting people into the right positions within the organization to thrive. You're not just trying to fill a position. You definitely want to be matching their skill set with the role.
Right. And one thought that comes to mind, Justin, as you're saying that, is we see a lot of organizations take someone who's great at receiving and they'll say, hey, you're great at this role in supply chain. Can you just start looking at our inventory? Or you're great at purchasing. Can you just start looking at our inventory? If there's one skill that I would say is really critical and needed for that type of role, is someone who is analytical. If you look across your supply chain team, your health system team, and you have that analytical person, I would say that's a key success factor for someone in this inventory or inventory optimization type of role.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the opportunities, because that's one of them, right? Putting the right people in the right place, but more detail-oriented around inventory optimization. Talk to me about use one, replace one, and then we'll build off of that and start talking about leveraging technology.
That is my favorite saying. Always brings a smile to my face when I hear that statement, because it's so true. And even hospitals, supply chain experts and departments say, why would we use one and replace one? That makes no sense whatsoever. And yet the very staff are use one, replace one, use one, replace one. So I think it's our human nature to see an empty spot and we want to fill it. And so there's a whole other level of opportunity of education, not just to the person doing inventory optimization, but to the entire supply chain team, as well as the clinicians, to set expectations and really do a little bit of a readjustment on our mindset and philosophy, that just because there's an empty space doesn't mean panic. It doesn't mean call 911 and let's get a stat order in here overnight and pay $200 to get it here by 10 a.m. or whatever the amount is. It means it's okay because we're saving money on the replenishment cycle. Instead of replenishing twice or 3 times a day, the supply team is going to come up to your area 1 time a day. But that also means you're going to have what you need. And so it's a challenging balance in supply chain, especially now with all the outside factors everyone's dealing with supply chain issues, quote unquote, that we hear and they're so tired of hearing. But resetting that expectation is important.
I love that you're bringing that up, Angie. Use one, replace one. And then at the same time, I think our brains go into strategic sourcing. Could it be on consignment? Do we have enough? Is it the right distributor? Is it coming from the right resource? How soon is it going to show up? All that stuff comes in the background as you're thinking through that, right? It's almost your mini analysis, correct?
Yes, and we were talking earlier about this. To your point, Gary, the supply chain's not what it used to be 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It's the supply chain person now in leader is the orchestra conductor. It's coordinating supply chain. It's coordinating physicians. It's coordinating the clinical needs. It's coordinating the suppliers, the distributors, all these different pieces and parts that truly have to work together to make a beautiful symphony out there. And it's a much more complex process now.
It's the number one thing right behind salary and benefits. Non-labor expense is supply chain. I mean, we own it, right? We own it.
Yes.
So let's talk about leveraging technology and what that would look like, because we did set the table for this conversation by talking a little bit about the workforce shortage, but that's really where I wanted to go with this is we've got to leverage technology, right? So how do we leverage it specifically around, doing this optimization with the inventory? Are there good tools that are out there? You mentioned some people are not doing it at all. Some people are doing it on a spreadsheet. What are maybe some, I'm not saying specific technologies, but some basic functionality or functionalities of technologies that might be implemented that would really help take this to the next level without having to throw bodies at it? Because I think that's a big part of it. If you're in a situation where the spreadsheet's the best thing you got, that means you got to just throw more bodies at it. We don't have any more to throw at this. So with that in mind, we know that organizations are, if they're not looking at technology today to change this issue, they will be tomorrow. So what should they be looking for so that they can accomplish successful inventory optimization when they're looking around?
Maybe let's start at the most rudimentary up to the utopia, shall we say? And starting at that basic level is what we've all seen and brings us are you kidding me moment to our minds is the Post-it note of here's my reminder that I need to replenish this, and then we go from Post-it to Excel, and there are optimization capabilities built in the MMIS systems. There are basic optimization capabilities built in point of view systems, open, closed. So there are various elements in the MMIS or material management information systems that have those optimization algorithms. So if you have nothing else, at least use the existing technology that you have to do those algorithms. And I would say then the next level being utopia is looking at third-party systems who take data from all the different elements across your health system, usage, inventory, item master, etc., dimensional information to say, okay, let's take all this bolus of data, analyze it, and then provide an output back.
I'm not going to go into the item master with you because that's probably a whole nother discussion podcast, Angie. Yeah. I love it though.
Totally agree.
I love it. And getting there is important, but getting to the utopia of, what's your thoughts on scanners and Wi-Fi and replenishment? And once again, I'm bringing this up because I see nurses doing a lot of the scanning still. They're scanning, they're pulling, they're scanning, they're pulling, and there's different systems out there. What does that look through? Is that a walkthrough with a specialized person walking the floors at night, replenishing? What are your thoughts on that?
I think we must remind ourselves every day there is not a single solution for the entire hospital. And what I mean by that is one method should not be used across every single inventory area. If you are using the same method across every single inventory area, you should ask a question and recognize and quickly say, we need to reassess this and reevaluate this. That's number one. Number two is ask the question why. We've all had lean training and our lean friends really instituted that within all of us and instilled that with ask the question why. Why are the nurses scanning for these items? Are we really getting reimbursement for these items? Is it really paying off to have a travel nurse scan an item at the rates we're paying a travel nurse for a 2x2 gauze? Probably not. And so those two questions are very important, and it's a good way to self-assess your own organization is, are we using the same inventory method? Are we treating everything like a par across the whole organization? Or do we have a mix of ABC inventory, par, to bin? Because depending on how those items are used and what department they are being used in will make a difference as to what methods should be utilized. And I think we have a tendency to think, let's take the easy route of let's do everything par, and that's not necessarily the right solution or the right answer, because it results in your clinician scanning or waving in. And even to technology, just one last thought on that, the same answer is true for the technology as it is for the inventory method. The same technology should not be used in all practices and all departments to manage your inventory. You shouldn't have an RFID scanner in your storeroom. It's a high cost. It's a high cost technology for low cost dollars. So we all probably remember the U-shaped curve of activity and expense and inventory for the economic order quantity visual in our past lessons and education. Utopia is in the middle. We don't want to go all in for most expensive technology is the best solution. We don't want to go all in for no technology and then all labor to offset the lack of technology. So finding that medium is very important.
All right. This is the last question. I'm going to drop the dreaded back orders word. Everybody's kind of tired of hearing this, but you can't wrap up a conversation around inventory optimization and not talk about back orders. But rather than focus on, how much of a struggle this has been, let's just focus on proper planning and how inventory optimization can help us be more successful with back order management.
Great. Yes. Totally agree. That is the dreaded discussion point. But
our audience was like, "Oh, I thought we were going to make it through this episode without somebody saying back order."
I don't think we mentioned that
drinking
C word, have we?
So knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power, and when you have the opportunity and can do analytics around your usage, and I'm sure some listeners are going, well, yeah, that's pretty basic. What's the difference about that? The difference is once you know what you are using, diversify. And that way, if you have one supplier that has a back order, I know that's not always the case that you can diversify for every single item, but at least for those items that are used the most, where you can diversify, use your data and the analytics to help you make those decisions about where is most important to diversify in supplier base. So in case one has a back order, you at least have a potential backup plan.
All right, Angie, this was a phenomenal interview, and I could hear you with your own podcast someday. You probably don't have the time, but you definitely have the speaking chops. So I want to thank you. You did a really good job in this interview, and we really enjoyed having you.
She's so much better than Gary.
Everybody knows that, Hayes. I mean, really.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor to come on today, and it was a pleasure and really enjoyed it.
Appreciate your knowledge, Angie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Angie. Go Vols.
That was Angie Haggard, CEO at Ron Denton and Associates LLC. We're talking about inventory optimization. How is it done today? How should it be done? What the future might look like? Definitely proper planning, and that dreaded word that everybody has gotten really sick of hearing about, back orders, as we wrapped up the interview there, Gary. Angie did a phenomenal job, and then she told us after we wrapped up the interview that that's the first podcast she's ever been on, and I got to tell you, you wouldn't know it.
Yeah, she seems to be pretty natural. I think you brought it up. She should have her own if she had time. She does a really good job. And, I just loved how she pulled everything together with the science, data, and art. She's obviously a wealth of information in what she understands in supply chain and does get the mission side of it as well. The soft skills she mentioned, not a single solution for all hospitals within supply chain in those certain areas on inventory management, as well as the technology. I think she tied that in really nice. So just a pleasure to have her on there. She's got a wealth of knowledge and just really appreciated her talk.
Yeah, I loved what she said. It's our natural human condition to want to replace something when it's empty. Fill something when it's empty. That was a great quote. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Power Supply on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. We're also available on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or you can simply search for Power Supply on your favorite podcast application. We've got bonus content for certain episodes, but you got to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. Simply search for Power Supply Media Podcast app on your app marketplace. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and review while you're there because your feedback is important to the show. And on behalf of Gary Hayes and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.